Hey, let's talk about ContraPoints and Israel. ContraPoints is a... Wait, no, you don't need me to tell you who ContraPoints is, right? In response to a flare-up of capital I, capital D internet discourse about whether or not creators like her should be or should have been more vocal in supporting Palestine in the face of Israel's genocide, ContraPoints recently posted on her subreddit to explain her stance and her chosen level of vocality. It's in 4 sections: doom, misery, dread, and bitterness, and it is, in my opinion, strange, misleading, and at points plain wrong. I feel it's worth using my platform to get into why that's the case, and to offer some alternative perspectives on the things this statement says, and on how we ought to respond to those things, and to the never-ending crab bucket drama discourse cycle that prompted their saying. Because, yes, I think ContraPoints is wrong. Wrong in a way that has a lot of people in her audience and wider left-leaning spaces ticked off, in a way that kinda has me, and may justifiably have you, a little angry. But well, the version of this script you're hearing now is my 3rd draft. I started writing this a couple of hours after the post in question dropped, but in the time it's taken me to revise and rewrite this response to the level I needed it to be, I've seen a bunch of other response videos pop up on my YouTube, Reddit, and Blue Sky feeds, and all of them have been framed as very personal critiques of ContraPoints herself. And if that remains the primary angle that online leftists collectively pursue in this moment, there is a way in which we're all missing the forest for the trees. Because really, we're not angry at ContraPoints. First though, a note on that drama cycle and its biggest recent discourse unit before we start in earnest. I imagine the direct prompt for this post's writing, or at least its publication, was a video by left-wing commentary channel The Tabernacle, titled The Death of BreadTube, Creator Responsibility and Israel, that started going soft viral in a few left-leaning discussion boards a day or two before ContraPoints posted. It's worth considering this video as we go, because it provides, I think, a stark and informative contrast to the response it spawned. It's a contrast we can see by looking at ContraPoint's opening line. So, many leftists feel betrayed because I haven't made a video on Palestine. Now, I'm not much of The Tabernacle watcher myself. Indeed, I think he's had a couple of kind of rancid takes in the past, and I don't think the video in question is flawless either, but it is worth noting the main point that video made wasn't I feel betrayed because some left-leaning content creators I look up to haven't made loud enough statements on Israel. It was the fact that some big left-leaning content creators haven't been as loud as we might have expected tells us, we the online left, probably ought to move away from centering these creators as avatars of 2025's online leftism. And while, again, I'm not sure I love the way it's packaged, The Tabernacle's rolling up of a few fairly different cases, creators who have been vocal to different extents under this fairly broad umbrella of BreadTube has failed, it's hard to think of a response that would have better supported that video's argument than the one ContraPoints posted. So enough preamble, let's start going through it. ContraPoints opens by expressing a feeling of futility, suggesting the invasion of Gaza and the intensification of Israel's genocide was a given. I'll quote, "The week after October 7th, it was clear the mood among Israeli leaders and civilians was overwhelmingly kill or be killed, existential panic, and unstoppable lust for revenge. It reminded me of the US after 9/11. There was no reasoning or protesting them out of it." This isn't exactly a mischaracterization, but it's an oddly passive phrasing. It elides the fact that A, the impulse towards this thoroughly dehumanizing, revenge-seeking, knee-jerk response is a feature, not a bug, of Israeli society, one very, very visible prior to 2023. I'll quote from one of Israeli historian Ilan Pappé's chapters in On Palestine, his 2015 collaboration with Noam Chomsky. "The Israeli propaganda machine attempts again and again to narrate its policies as out of context, and turns the pretext it found for every previous wave of destruction into the main justification for another spree of indiscriminate slaughter in the killing fields of Palestine. The Zionist strategy of branding its brutal policies as an ad hoc response to this or that Palestinian action is as old as the Zionist presence in Palestine itself. It was used repeatedly as a justification for implementing the Zionist vision of a future Palestine that has in it very few, if any, native Palestinians." That's A. Then there's B. Even in the short term, that bloodlust was a direct product of Israel's leadership. Benjamin Netanyahu had advanced knowledge of Hamas's planned attack on October the 7th and didn't act to avert it. He also had a long-standing policy approving Qatari funds earmarked for Hamas into Gaza in order to ensure Hamas remained the dominant form of Gazan opposition. Those are facts. It's been explained by some as Israel doubting Hamas would actually go through with it, but given that mere weeks after the attack took place, an Israeli think tank tied to Netanyahu had published a report explicitly casting the attack as Israel's perfect excuse for the complete ethnic cleansing of Gaza, only a literal baby would be naive enough to imagine that the same thought process had not occurred to Israel's leaders themselves. So framing, as ContraPoints does, as many others have, Israel's mood of panic and bloodlust as something that simply happened to the country, rather than a direct and likely intentional result of Israeli leadership, well, it's kind of burying the genocidal lead. Following this, ContraPoints is right to suggest the US couldn't ever have and wouldn't ever have withdrawn military aid from Israel overnight, that doing so on any time frame would mark a break in foreign policy, and that best case, something like this happening on a level that would move needles would take years. Feeling some sense of futility at the end of 2023, hey, that's natural. And I'm not saying ContraPoints was wrong to feel that way, but I am saying it's important to remember that even back in 2023, precedent existed for the US restricting Israel's actions more than they ended up doing. Back in the 1980s, for instance, President Reagan threatened to withhold aid to Israel as Israel attacked Lebanon and provoked further regional conflict. Time is a flat circle. And he actually went through with it. Reagan! If the fucking devil himself can hold Israel to account, I don't think we should have concluded on October the 8th that Biden simply couldn't. We should also note that US military aid hasn't simply continued unabated since 2023, it's skyrocketed. Quoting a report by Gregory Aftendillian at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C., US military aid to Israel has amounted to $17.9 billion since October the 7th, according to a Brown University study, an amount that is far above the very generous $3.8 billion the United States gives Israel annually. And I'm also saying that the way those feelings of futility have been deployed in ContraPoints' post is strange. ContraPoints opens by expressing a feeling of futility, suggesting the invasion of Gaza and the intensification of Israel's genocide was a given, and therefore that opposition was/is somewhat pointless. Opening a "why haven't I been more vocal" post by expressing that feeling of futility is implicitly a justification for not speaking more. And jump ahead to point 4 and how it picks up on that futility angle if you think that's an unfair characterization on my part. Now, that justifying would be one thing if the topic at hand was, say, a meteor bearing down on the planet, but Israel's ability to continue its century of genocide rests utterly on the support of countries like the US, UK, France, and so on. Support that will waver if and when voters and consumers reject their nation's complicity, and politicians in those countries realize they will lose their power by letting Israel continue unchecked. That's what happened with apartheid in South Africa, and that's the goal of movements like BDS today, who, despite recognizing that nothing will change overnight, continue to persevere for tomorrow. Because, historically, big things rarely happen overnight, but they do still happen, and frequently those changes too are seen as impossible before the fact. Mere months before the Berlin Wall fell, expert opinion was pretty unified that it'd last for decades more. That something would take years, even in the best case, is not an excuse to wallow in futility, it's a reason to start now. This is a reason Israel should be opposed, being presented as a reason Israel can't be opposed. That will become something of a trend in ContraPoints' post. ContraPoints objects to the leftist pro-Palestine movement opposing Zionism itself, which she defines as the support for the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. To her, opposing this is too radical a position. But it really shouldn't be. The existence of France as an ethnic French state probably would be, right? Or, say, Germany deciding that only an in-group of ethnic Germans get to enjoy equal rights. Sorry, Slavic minorities who have been living in modern Saxony since time immemorial. No Sorb for you. Dress it up however you want, supporting the existence of a state that treats Jews or any other ethno-religious group with special consideration is a call for ethno-supremacy. But it's also worth noting, and this really is key, Zionism, at least Zionism as it has existed for the past century, Zionism as the term is used today, doesn't simply connote the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, it connotes the existence of Israel as a Jewish state at the expense of specific others. Primarily, of course, the Arab Palestinians, whose land, homes, and national identity have all been taken by Zionism and ground into the dust their state sits atop of. It's worth noting because a lot of people don't realize this, but Palestinian citizens of Israel, that is, non-Jewish nationals, do not have equal rights. Petitions to change this gained steam in 2013, but were rejected by the Supreme Court because fixing this little legal hiccup would, quote, undermine Israel's Jewishness. You might recognize this as the reason most of us don't like the idea of ethnostates. They are, by their nature, a fundamentally exclusionary concept, and even within the history of Israel, that exclusionary nature is visible in a wide array of different ways. In her classic study Sephardim in Israel, Zionism from the standpoint of its Jewish victims, Jewish historian Ella Shohat points out that, quote, although Zionism claims to provide a homeland for all Jews, that homeland was not offered to all with the same largesse. That insofar as Zionism was ever a liberation movement, it was a liberation movement centered primarily on that tiny minority of European Jews settled in Israel. She goes on to detail the many examples of Arabic Jewish immigrants being exploited and discriminated against by Ashkenazi Zionists, sometimes in, and I'm quoting, quasi-eugenic ways. Leaving that line of thought for another day, though, if Zionism is predicated on a Jewish supremacist state existing in the same location as, and at the expense of, an existing nation, that is, Palestine, not to mention the other ethnicities and groups who were living in the region of Palestine at the time of Zionist colonization, then Zionism and genocide are bound up together, and any attempt to separate them is meaningless beyond an aesthetic level. ContraPoints' wish for a coalition against Zionist genocide but not against Zionism feels rather like allying yourself with PG tips before starting a war on tea. That's kind of what the thing does. But to her subpoints. First, it shrunk the coalition. There are in fact many recent polls showing that American support for Palestine has reached a historic high, and that conversely, support for Israel has dropped massively. Many Jews are Zionist, it's true, but certainly not all of them, and a growing number of them are speaking out against the nation weaponizing their identity and history to commit genocide and annex land. That being said, the recent left-wing response to Israel's continuing pattern of genocidal behavior has perhaps shrunk a coalition, diminished wide support for one position, but that position is the liberal Zionist position. To ignore the growing pro-Palestine coalition and fix upon the liberal Zionist coalition as the coalition we need to concern ourselves with is strange, and I think quite short-sighted. I don't know enough about ContraPoints politics specifically to get personal here, but I will observe that this "we need a big tent, but it has to be my tent, and everyone to the left of me has just got to crouch down and smush in" mindset, the assumption that their coalition is always the coalition, that is the same mindset that's been shutting out any left-wing politicians with the power to actually get elected and make change for a good long while now. Relevant example, the way the biggest threat to Dem primary victor Zoram Mamdani's bid for NYC mayor is the Democrats. Choosing to do this, choosing unilaterally what's feasible and what isn't, is the thing that shrinks the left's unity and collective power. ContraPoints picks up this idea of feasibility in her next point, arguing there is no path that ends with the dismantling of Jewish supremacy in Israel and occupied Palestine, besides a total collapse of the Israeli state or nuclear war. But that's not true. What about a path where the Anglo-American left-wing establishment sees the writing on the wall, recognizes that especially as the rapidly encroaching perma-crisis intensifies, neoliberal business-as-usual style governance has no future, that electoralism's future is a choice between the Mamdanis, Bernies, Corbyns et al. Getting their shot, or fascism. Maybe they stop with the unforced errors and consider adopting some of these wildly popular progressive policies, and maybe they cave to an increasing level of internal pressure and reorient foreign policy away from forever empire and fortress Israel. Maybe Western support becomes conditional on Israel laying down its arms, then on tearing down the barbed wire, then on equal rights and reparations, yada yada yada, ethno-state go bye-bye. See? I just thought one up. Anyone can do that. Something like the above wouldn't happen overnight, would require masses of effort, possibly even sacrifice. But leftists are choosing to use their imagination to picture paths forward, championing a, well, let's call it a long shot rather than a doomed cause like ContraPoints does, because the alternative is begrudgingly resigning ourselves to being okay with genocide. Putting policy and pragmatism first, then figuring out what's currently feasible, what's close enough at hand to believe in, is kind of doing an ideology backwards. Furthermore, the position that the only causes we should view as non-futile and therefore worth speaking up for, worth supporting, are the ones which don't require much effort and are straightforwardly imaginable to the median voter, isn't simply an unimaginative and perhaps cowardly one, it is, frankly, ahistorical. Take the Emancipation Proclamation. To the average northerner who privately disapproved of slavery, the idea of government unilaterally declaring southern slaves to be free would have seemed unthinkably radical before the war. Immediate abolition on a national scale was unfeasible, right up until it happened. Or hey, take the Berlin Wall thing again. Look, we've done this before. Quote-unquote futile things end up happening all the time. You remember. Subpoint 3, the dangerous ambiguities. This is, in essence, a development of the concerns ContraPoints had recently voiced about left anti-Semitism. We'll come back to that idea itself shortly, but let's quote. The vagueness of Zionism as a political Satan enables all kinds of rhetorical abuses. On the one hand, right-wing Israelis hold up all anti-Zionist protests as existentially threatening and inherently anti-Semitic. On the other hand, there is a long history of anti-Semites using the term Zionist in deliberately equivocal ways. Zog, etc. Anti-Semites are happy for the opportunity to misappropriate the now popular anti-Zionist label to legitimize their agenda, and many people are not informed enough about anti-Semitism to recognize when this is happening. These problems are mutually reinforcing. Problem is, as ideas go, Zionism isn't that vague. I don't want to say that the term has only ever referred to the building of a state, one that resembles modern Israel, because that wouldn't be true, especially in earlier times. There were different takes on Zionism. For some cultural or religious Zionists, it didn't even necessarily mean state building at all. That being said, since the establishment of Israel a century or so ago, the political definition of Zionism we've been using today has overwhelmingly become what is conveyed by the term. And we can see ContraPoints knows this, because this is the definition she gave earlier, Zionism as supporting the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, like we covered, by hanging onto this, I guess, Platonic Zionism, where that existence of a state is abstract, is not on top of Palestine and Palestinians. Her post was able to frame Zionism separately from the feature not a bug genocide stuff, but as ideas go, it is not vague, and the use of it does not enable any more rhetorical abuses than any other word. Like, I don't know, DEI, right? That meant something specific, and the fact that rhetorical abuse of it ensued doesn't mean the people coming up with diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the first place shouldn't have. What follows is an equivalence between the way anti-Zionism is painted by Israel and its allies as evidence of an existentially threatening tide of anti-Semitism, and the, quote, long history of anti-Semites co-opting anti-Zionist language to sneak real hate into the conversation. And look, anti-Semitism is obviously a problem. There is data to show anti-Semitic incidents are increasing in frequency. We should all do our best, on and offline, to move in and cultivate spaces where anti-Semitism, or prejudice of any kind for that matter, is not tolerated. But while anti-Zionism currently enjoys maybe the most mainstream acceptance it ever has, that bar remains exceptionally low. Mainstream news will still refuse to platform you, ostensibly left-wing parties will purge you just like that, and if you're in entertainment, get used to being blackballed. The depressing truth is that anti-Semitism regularly gets laundered through an extremely wide array of ideas, and that in some cases, anti-Zionism has been one of them. But if we're not blaming NASA's aerospace advances for letting the idea of Jewish space lasers emerge, we probably shouldn't blame critics of Israel for the fact that Nazis are able to Nazi their words too. It's true there is some data that suggests anti-Semitic incidents arising in anti-Zionist spaces, but if you click past the headlines and look at what's being counted as anti-Semitic, you'll get things like people chanting that Palestine should be free, or people repudiating Zionists. That Anti-Defamation League article admits a majority of the cases included in their 2024 audit were tied to Israel or Zionism, so it's hard to get a handle on how far actual statistics would back up this idea of a surging left anti-Semitism let through the door into mainstream politics by anti-Zionists. As for anecdotal evidence, I can't share much directly, I am not Jewish after all. But I can and do listen to Jewish voices, and here I am reminded of a point anti-Zionist writer Sim Kern made in their recent book, Genocide Bad. To quote, "Because of the conflation of Israel with Jewish people generally, it's sort of shocking that there isn't more anti-Jewish hate within the Free Palestine movement, but truly in years of organising, I have never encountered any." But the idea Kern's getting at in the start of the quoted passage bears bringing up here too. If there is a general rise of anti-Semitism, or anti-Jewish hate to use Kern's preferred terminology, to be observed since 2023, is the primary force driving this going to be a vagueness around the definition of Zionism, or is it going to be the state that spent 8 decades trying its best to equate Zionism and wider Jewishness, doing a genocide and threatening to plunge the region into wider war? I will go with Kern here and point my finger at the latter. Returning to the post, ContraPoints seems to disagree, and places the Zionist co-opting of wider Jewishness as equivalent to anti-Semites exploiting the supposed vagueness of anti-Zionist language to push hate. Again, both of these are valid concerns, but as I hope we've established, there is a marked difference in degree, and here this is reduced to a on the one hand, on the other situation. Maybe if ContraPoints clarified that one of these hands was the hands of a Lilliputian and the other that of a giant, we'd have a workable point. Alas, we do not. I'll quote the heart of this point directly. "The online left has spent the last 20 months distributing hundreds of photos and videos of dead Palestinian children. The main effect of this has been to create a population of people in a constant state of blood-boiling rage, with no consequential political outlet. I fear this may be worse than useless. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are conceptually not the same, and conflating them is dangerous. But in practice, the way Israel is perceived does seep out into attitudes towards Jews in general. I don't think Jews who feel isolated and wary in the current atmosphere are simply hysterical or hallucinating." Let's stick with Kern a while longer. Another point made in Genocide Bad ties directly in here, and lets us see that Jews who, quote, feel isolated and wary in the current atmosphere can have real material reasons for their hypervigilance, without those reasons being any real danger of surging leftist anti-Semitism. Victimhood is such a central facet of Judaism that Jews who have lived sheltered lives of extreme privilege sometimes develop a perverse desire of persecution. When you've been told your whole life that everyone else wants to kill you, but have seen zero evidence of it, you start to jump at shadows. For context, this comes after an earlier section of the book had gone over the history of Jewish persecution in Europe, and the ways in which that history's present impacts can be tailored. Kern points to the way so much of the funding for Holocaust memory-keeping projects comes from the Israeli government or private Zionist sources, which leads to head-scratches like Holocaust survivors being disinvited from speaking at Holocaust museums after they protest for Palestine, as well as noting analogues in the world of publishing, like the Jewish Book Council or PJ Library, which buy up stock and issue grants, ensuring, for example, children's books about Jewish persecution will tend to find publishers and financial success in a way a book about the genocide of indigenous Americans will not. In their words, "We're only allowed to remember Jewish history in ways that are convenient to Zionism. History-making is always political. Zionists have dominated Jewish history-making for far too long, pouring billions of dollars in funding to universities, museums, and historical foundations so they will remember only our genocide. They have fetishized our victimhood and weaponized our grief so that the global Jewish community would co-sign their own bloody genocidal project against Palestinians. As anti-Zionist Jews, we must take back our history." Maintaining an image of the Jewish identity as one perennially under siege even today across the globe, whose safety is guaranteed only by the continued existence of Israel as a Zionist apartheid state, that very clearly benefits one party in particular. And their name rhymes with Blizrael. Sorry, I'm being glib again, aren't I? Anyway, refocusing our attention on Israel's own actions here is more apt than you might think from a cursory scan of ContraPoint's third section. You see, I'm afraid I've been burying the lead. As usual, the framing here is fundamentally wrong. ContraPoints lays the blame for the circulation of horrific Palestinian gore on the online left. It's as a result of their actions that this blood-boiling rage has festered, and now has the potential to seep out and incite anti-Semitism. But, no, actually. I think it's probably Israel that's to blame for all those pictures of dead Palestinian kids, really. Again, the root cause of the negatives ContraPoints ties up with anti-Zionism is Zionism. Again, this is another reason Israel should be opposed as strongly as possible, being presented as a reason Israel shouldn't be. The point ends by suggesting this is all a reason not to act, unless it's clear that tangible benefits are to be had through action. But as we're about to see, ContraPoint's sense of what's been gained and what hasn't, alongside her sense for what constitutes tangibility, might be a little warped. Section 4, Bitterness expresses an echo of Section 1. Initially, ContraPoints framed leftist anti-Zionism as a futile response to the invasion of Gaza, and here she presents the idea that not only did this have zero positive effects whatsoever, it may actually have had a negative one. It may have helped Donald Trump win re-election. Again, we'll start with the first point. Big Joel made a short thread on Blue Sky after ContraPoint's post dropped, and I'd like to quote from his second and last posts. They do a good job of summing up the most obvious counterpoints. Americans have profoundly changed their perspectives on Israel. The average Democrat is more inclined toward Palestine than Israel now. Is that nothing? Is our relationship with our greatest ally going to disappear in a day? It just seems like she's applying an overly narrow measure of success. I truly don't have an axe to grind with Natalie. I just keep thinking, like, Zoran Mamdani is the frontrunner to be mayor of New York, says he'd arrest Netanyahu. Was his a victory of the online left? At least kinda, right? More relevant there than with Kamala, at least. Also, why don't we bring in some benefits of an anti-Zionist-centered coalition that are a little less tangible? Some of these come with the choice to collectively underscore the red line of we should always oppose genocide unconditionally. It's easy to oppose genocide in theory, and then not stick to that opposition whenever a genocide is complicated and nuanced. To be clear, I'm not saying that's ContraPoint's position here. This is a wider point I'm making, because actually, a lot of genocides were complicated and nuanced. Oh, Wounded Knee bad, you say? Well, what about the safety of American frontiersmen, right? This is because history is complicated and nuanced. Life is complicated and nuanced, but things can be complicated, nuanced, and also indefensible, also fundamentally evil. Like genocide. You know, obviously. Clarifying that for ourselves as Western leftists is probably a benefit, right? Both from a position of ideological coherence and maybe from a more pragmatic point of view too. As much as we'd all like to hope otherwise, kinda likely this won't be the last genocide in history. And the more we push back now, the more we stand in solidarity, the harder that solidarity will be to break should the genocidal reticles of imperialism and capital ever end up pointing at some of us. But let's think back to tangibility for a second, because finally, and probably most importantly, some Palestinian lives have absolutely been saved as a result of online left-wing efforts against Zionism. We're not God or, the president, so yeah, we've not managed to stop the genocide, but a lot of us have successfully raised money for or donated to the types of relief charities working in Palestine who actively provide humanitarian aid to the country's besieged citizens. This is absolutely bound up with the anti-Zionism online, as is the fact that as of March last year, GoFundMe alone had seen $77 million raised for Palestinian evacuees. That's not good news. Leaving your homeland because you might die if you stay is a fairly slim silver lining as silver linings go, but 0 Palestinian lives were saved? Respectfully, come the fuck on. Point 2 then. Did leftists failing to hold their noses and vote for the genocide but maybe less bad candidate let Trump win? Well, by looking at the number of votes that swung to the only anti-genocide candidate, Jill Stein, who it should be noted is kind of batshit in her own right too, and by looking particularly at the way there weren't enough there to have given Kamala a victory, we can see that blaming uppity anti-genocide leftists for ruining her chance doesn't hold the most water in the world, which, judging by her squirrely language, may slightly ContraPoints sees too. It's true that there aren't numbers we can look at for the amount of online leftists who chose to just stay home altogether, and that by extension this subpoint can't be disproved, but it's also true that there aren't numbers we can look at for the amount of online leftists who stayed home, so there's certainly no reason to accept it either. For clarity, I observe all this as a person who, at the time, urged my American followers to swallow the lesser evil pill and vote blue, and who agrees with ContraPoints that the prognosis on the ground for Gazans would likely have been less bleak with Kamala in the White House. Either way, I think it's fair to say subpoint 2 here is an unfounded one on any level beyond vibes. One piece of evidence that does exist, however, is polling information suggesting that a thing that may have cost Kamala victory was, say it with me everyone, her unconditional support for Israel. Before we move away from the post, it is worth considering ContraPoints TLDR. TLDR, I see the situation as bleak, intractable, extremely divisive, and devoid of any element that could be appropriately transformed into political entertainment. That's why I haven't made a video about it. I think this says a lot. ContraPoints writes that she doesn't see an angle that can be transformed into political entertainment, but her critics see many angles that can be appropriately transformed into political critique. Obviously, there is no contradiction here. Critique and entertainment are markedly different things. And I'm not even going to argue that creators have a responsibility to the audiences they collate, or that it's the duty of left-leaning entertainment to imagine possibilities beyond the bullet-ridden walls of capitalist imperialist realism, beyond the feasible. Either way, the charge here, or at least the most recent highest profile charge, isn't ContraPoints should make a video about Israel, it's channels like ContraPoints have become obsolete as political fronts for contemporary leftism. Ultimately, ContraPoints' post, or at least its TLDR, seems to be in agreement with this. But I'm also not going to argue for those points because, at the end of the day, that may all be true, but even so, I'm not angry at ContraPoints, not really. I think that's true for a lot of you too, with the possible exception of any long-time ContraPoints fans who have grown frustrated of her reflexively adopting compromised positions and marking any options too far left of her as unrealistic, and of criticism to that effect falling on deaf ears. Because, sure, ContraPoints is wrong about Israel, and that sucks, but, and listen, this one's important, do you know who's wronger? Do you know whose wrongness matters more? Benjamin Netanyahu, our elected officials, my head of state and probably yours too. Too often online we project all of that onto people like ContraPoints because they feel within reach in a way that's not true for the people actually driving our problems. I don't want to diminish the power of content creators too much because we do occupy a somewhat privileged position. Not privileged relative to political actors, our counterparts in the mainstream media, or even just garden variety rich people, sure. But we speak and people hear. Sometimes they even listen. That's not much in the grand scheme of things, but it's certainly not nothing either. If ContraPoints says a cause is doomed, that will mark it as so to some. You can look in the comments below and see this. See ContraPoints' words dooming causes in real time. But equally, I don't want us to get carried away. Wrapping political critique or important information within a YouTube drama slop type shell can be an effective tactic for spreading a message. Just look at Noah Samson's channel, right? But it is also a limited one. If all you take away from something like those videos, or the Cavernacles, or indeed from something like this, is a new level of performative dislike for a content creator or two, that tactic has failed. If you scroll down to the top comments here right now and they're filled with a bunch of comments attacking ContraPoints, or myself for that matter, if that's what we're getting from this video, then I have failed. Because it's not really about creators, is it? Viewers or other creators criticizing bigger channels for not doing enough activism in the way they want, that is ultimately an expression of how powerless those critics feel themselves, and of the way algorithmic success and online engagement metrics sometimes look like power. We're not angry at ContraPoints for being wrong about Israel, or about BreadTube for abandoning us, or whatever. We're angry at the fact that our voices don't count for anything, that we are all more or less politically disenfranchised. That's where the rage is coming from, and rightfully so. And it's kind of a rough pill to swallow, but projecting that onto content creators as negativity isn't going to make that gulp an easier one, or bring that pill back up. Thanks for watching. As always, more videos, properly edited ones that is, coming soon on a variety of topics. If you feel like it, you can support my work and make sure I get to keep putting out videos over at patreon.com/pillarofgarbage or by the YouTube membership like the people on screen now are doing. Big thank you to all of them, and especially Hanan, Daniel Goldhorn, Harry Price, Kwang Yu Liu, Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy.